Okay, so today we're going to be working in After Effects and we're going to work through this puppet pin tutorial. Here you can see the PDF guide which kind of goes through step by step what we'll be doing here in the video. I'm just going to put that to one side. So I'll start by showing you kind of the end product of what we're working towards here. So this is a video that I made earlier in the week. And you're going to see Finn walking along on a parallax background, and the character has been rigged using the puppet pins in After Effects.
Picture time, come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands. Take the dog and then we can plan the boat, we'll never end this adventure.
So as you can see, it's just a nice, simple little 12-second animation. It doesn't take too long to make, so we'll just get straight into it. So you open up After Effects. First thing that we want to do is import the files that we need. Like the PDF guide, these should be available on Blackboard. So to do that, we're going to go File, Import, File. And we need to click and drag and select all the files that we need. So we've got the audio, the background, and our two characters here, the layers. And the next thing we want to do is where it says import as footage, we need to change that to composition. If we import it as footage, then the layers will be merged and be flat, so we'll just get flat images, which is not what we want. So where it says import as, change that to composition and click open. So here you can see we've got the files as we just saw, but then underneath we've got the folders with the individual layers, which means we'll be able to put animation. We'll have a lot more control over what's going on. So what we're going to do first is we want this fin composition. We need to duplicate that so we've got something separate to work with, and if we mess up or we need to go back, we'll always have these original compositions with nothing on them. So select the fin layers composition and go to edit, duplicate. Now you can see there's a copy there, right? So what we need to do now is just rename that. So we're going to call it Fin Puppet. So to rename, just hit enter, and I'm going to call it Fin Puppet. And then if we double click on that, it'll appear here in our timeline. Now automatically for you it may look like this on a black background, and to change that it's just this button here, this little checkered box will toggle transparency so you can see what's going on, because his feet kind of disappear when he's against the black background, and that's not really ideal. So just toggle that so he's on a checkered background. Now you can see here with the layers we've got the front arm on top, then the front leg, head and torso, back leg, back arm. And those are ordered. On the top is the layer that's nearest to us, and on the bottom the layer that's furthest away. So the first thing we're going to do is select the puppet pin tool, which is this little pin icon here at the top. It's nice and simple, and we're going to start by clicking roughly where his shoulder is. Okay. Now you can see this yellow dots appeared, and that's basically a puppet pin. And you can see I've got this mesh. If the mesh isn't showing up for you, just tick this box and it'll appear. So the next thing we want to do is put another pin where the elbow is. Okay, and then one where the hand is. So these are the 3 pins that we need for the arm. And what this allows us to do is if I click and drag the pin now, you can see it's deforming the joint, or the limb, sorry. Okay, so it just allows you to be able to kind of bend and warp whatever you're putting the pins on. I can move the elbow, I could move the shoulder, but we're not really going to be moving the shoulder today. So I'll just undo and reset it as it was. So the next thing to do is to name these pins. So over here on the front arm layer, you can see these drop downs have appeared automatically. These arrows, so if I click this arrow on the front arm layer, you can either collapse or expand and go into more detailed controls. So what we need to do to rename these is in the drop down, we need to click here next to mesh 1 and then deform, and you can see we've got our 3 puppet pins. So the puppet pin 3 is highlighted, that's the hand. Okay, so we're going to work our way down. I want to rename again. To rename, you need to click on whatever you want to rename and hit enter. And I'm going to call this front hand. Puppet pin 2 is the elbow, so we call that front elbow. And pin 1 is the shoulder, so that's front shoulder. And then the last thing we need to do for the arm is move this. This is our pivot point or anchor point. And what this does is basically acts as a center for the layer. So if I were to rotate this now, so if I click on the layer and hit R to bring up the rotation control, you'll see it rotates around that. And that's not what we want. We want basically this to be at the shoulder joint. So to do that, we need to use this tool, the anchor point tool. Okay, so if I click on that, I can now click on the anchor point and drag it into place where the shoulder is. Now if I move the rotation, you can see it rotates from the shoulder, which is perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to undo that so it's back in position. So that's the arm done. The next thing we want to do is the leg. So it's the exact same thing again. So click on the leg layer here in the timeline. If you hold spacebar, you get this hand icon and you can drag the comp around in the screen. So I'm just going to drag it up so I can see what I'm doing with the leg. And I'm also, the arm's kind of obscuring the leg a bit. So because I don't need to see that at the minute, I'm just going to toggle this eye icon here next to the front arm and it'll disappear. So front leg, puppet pin tool again, and we'll do the same thing. We're going to start at the hip, so click there, the knee and the foot. Okay, so we need to name those again. So again, that's click on the drop down for mesh 1 and deform. So puppet pin 3 is the foot, so I'm going to call that front foot. Front knee, front knee, and front hip. Okay, and again, we need to set the anchor point to the hip. So we'll go to the anchor point tool and click and drag over the hip. And that's the leg done. So let's turn the leg off as well as we work down through the layers so we can just see what we're doing all the way. So next we've got the head and torso. So I'm going to click on the head and torso layer, puppet pin tool again, and then we want one roughly in line with the head, torso, waist, or hips, it's up to you. We need to rename them again, so it's dropped down on the mesh, deform, and we're going to call it waist, torso, head. And this time we want the anchor point to be where the waist is. Okay, so anchor point tool, click and drag that into place. So you can see if we do any rotation, which we won't, but if we do, you can see he's rotating from the hips. Okay, we'll turn that layer off. And now it's the exact same thing as we did for the other arm and leg. So on the back leg, I'm going to click with the puppet pin tool, hip, knee, foot. Drop down on mesh 1, deform, and rename those. So this time back foot, back knee, back hip, and then it's the anchor point tool. You can't really see it that well against this checkered background, but just if you look closely, you'll find it. It's generally in the center by default. So anchor point tool, let's move that to the hip, and that's the back leg done, and then we've got the back arm. So again, puppet pin tool, shoulder, elbow, hand. Drop down on mesh 1, drop down on deform, and rename those. Enter, back, hand, back, elbow, back, shoulder. And finally, we're just going to move the anchor point to the shoulder. Okay, and I'm just going to collapse that layer, and then I'm going to hit the eye icon on the other layers. So we've got fin back. So that's it. All of the separate parts are now rigged. The last thing we need to do is parent the limbs to the torso, and I'll show you why. So if I move the torso around, which we will be doing in the animation, you can see it moves independently of everything. So if we parent the limbs to the torso, essentially whenever we move the torso, the limbs will move with it. So to parent, what we're going to do is select the front arm, and if you hold Control or Command if you're on a Mac and click on the leg, both leg layers and both arm layers, we've got them selected. We go over to this little swirly icon here, and we click and drag that. You can see the string appears, and drop it onto the head torso layer. So now if I click on the head or torso layer, sorry, one thing I should explain, like while I've got these selected, if I want to deselect these, I can just click here anywhere in a blank area and it'll deselect. So if I click on the head torso layer, now if I move that, everything moves with it. But I can still click on a layer and move those independently. So that's how parenting works. And that's it. The puppet's rigged. So now we're ready to move on to animation. So what I'm going to do next is just duplicate this composition again. So the fin puppet composition. So if I go to Edit, Duplicate, I've now got another copy, and I'm going to hit Enter and rename that to Fin Walk Cycle. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is we're about to put a load of keyframes on this and animate it. Now if I want to do a separate animation of fin in this side position, I can easily just go back to the fin puppet and animate that without, it's not got any of the keyframes on it, it's not got any manipulation, and it's basically, we've got a nice blank canvas to animate with again. So that's why I always duplicate. Once a character's rigged, it's good to duplicate it, so you've got a copy that if you ever want to do any other animations with, you don't have to go through the rigging process again. It's just there ready to use. So I'm going to double click on Fin Walk Cycle. Now this will come up here, and I'm just going to close the fin puppet here with this cross. So I'm just going to do a couple of things to kind of make the animation process quicker and easier. So we're going to animate the rotation on the limbs. So I'm going to do the same thing again, hold down Command or Control and just select both arms and both legs. And if you hit R or R on the keyboard, it will bring up rotation. And you want to click this stopwatch icon here. Now that stopwatch icon basically sets into motion that it sets your first keyframe and lets the computer know that you're animating that property. So every time you manipulate it at any point on the timeline, it will now set a keyframe. So you can see these 4 dots here that are highlighted blue. These are your keyframes on rotation. And we're also going to be editing the position properties on the head and torso. So if we click on the head torso layer and hit P, it'll bring up position, and we want to hit the stopwatch again. Okay. Another important thing we need to do is just make sure that we're working with the right frame rate and that our composition is the right length. So if you just go to composition settings, mine's already set up right because I've done this exercise a couple of times, but you want to make sure that your frame rate is at 25 frames a second. Okay, it's probably at 29.7 by default, but just set it to 25. You know, in terms of the aspect ratio, you want it at 4K, so 3840 by 2160. And then here where it says duration, we want to set that to 12 seconds. So these are the seconds here, these are individual frames. And you've got minutes, hours. So just set that to 12 seconds and then click OK. Okay, so we've got our rotation and position keyframes there. Now, if I click here and press Ctrl A, it'll select all the layers. Now, if I press U, it's going to bring up all the keyframes. So you'll see what I mean. We've got keyframes on all of the puppet pins as well. And then we've got our rotation keyframe. So I'm just going to drag this out of the way so you can see. We've basically got 4 keyframes, 4 animatable properties with keyframes on them for each layer. So we've got each of the 3 puppet pins, and then on the limbs we've got rotation, on the head and torso we've got position. So let's have a look now at the reference that we're going to be working for the walk. So this is our basic reference for a walk cycle. This is on Blackboard as well, so if you've got 2 monitors, maybe have this up on your second monitor, because we're going to be you know, referring back to this a lot. Or you could just import it here. So if you click here on your bin on the left and go to File, Import, or Command or Control I if you want the shortcut, and then just import that. I can drag this here, and then I'm just going to scale it down a bit. So if I hit S on this layer, it brings up the scale controls, and I'm just going to set that to about 40%. Okay, and then move it out of the way so I can see Finn clearly. I'll just drag it to the side. Okay. So what you can see here, I'm just going to bring up the big image again. Here we've got these numbers here. So we've got the order. So this is basically the order in which we're going to put Finn into these poses, and then you've got the frame number. So these are the frame numbers that you want these poses and the keyframes to fall on, and these are the names for the poses. You know, if you're not a first year, then you may already, you know, or should probably be familiar with these poses for the walk cycle. So the first pose that we're going to do is the contact pose here, and you can see there order 1, so that's the first one, and we're going to be working to basically the same pose again to complete the cycle here. So that's the second in the order, and then we're going to be working with the opposite contact pose, and that's going to be the third, and we're going to kind of work in between. So you can see we go 1 to the end, 2 to the middle, 3 to the middle of 1 and 3, to 4 to the middle of 3 and 2, to 5, and then work along 6, 7, 8, 9. This might be a bit confusing, but just bear with me. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is just get Finn into this first contact pose. So to do that, we need to rotate this front arm so it's behind him. So if you hover over the numbers on rotation, you can see these two little black arrows here. And if I click and drag left or right, you can see that's altering the rotation. So we want this arm to come back like that. Right? And then the front arm, the back arm behind him needs to come forward. So again, I'm going to click on the rotation and just bring that forward. The legs, you can see the front leg is extending forward. So let's go to the front leg layer. I'm going to edit the rotation. But it needs to straighten out, and that's where the puppet pins come in. So if I click on the front foot pin, I can then drag and kind of stretch the leg a little bit. Edit his knee too, just to straighten it out. Okay, and then I'm going to go to the back leg, rotate it back a bit. And then I'm going to go on the back foot. So you can see the leg's a little bit bent. There we go. I've got the upper body, the torso is kind of leaning forward a little bit. So I'm going to go onto the head and torso layer, click on the head, kind of have that come forward a bit, maybe bring the torso as well, and just have him leaning forward a little bit. Okay, so that's the contact pose done. Now you'll see here on the reference that you've also got these two lines for the guides. There's one for the feet, which helps you keep the feet planted and make the walk believable, and then one for the head, which is to help you monitor kind of the up and down height. You can see here that the head is moving up and down in a nice arc. So what we're going to do is add some shape layers to make these guidelines for Finn. So I click over here, I'm just going to select all, so Control or Command A, select all, and hit U to just collapse the layers. Yeah? And then click off to deselect. Now I want to make a new layer, so if I go to Layer, New, Shape Layer, it should automatically put you onto the rectangle tool. If the rectangle's not there, click and hold down and you can just select rectangle. Colour doesn't matter too much. I'm just going to click and drag and make a line. Okay, and then I want to move this line. So if I click and try and drag that again, it's just going to make another rectangle. So I'm going to undo that. You need to go up to here and select the selection tool, or V on the keyboard to get the selection tool. And now I can move this around, and I want to line this up with the feet. Okay, and I'm going to rename it, click on the layer here, hit enter, and call it foot line. Okay, and then I want to make a duplicate of that for the head, so I'm just going to hit Command or Control D, which is basically a shortcut for edit, duplicate. Okay, and then I'm going to move that up to the top of the ears on his hat. Okay, and I'm going to call that, hit enter, I'm going to call it head line. Okay, and then I'm just going to select these 3 layers and drag them down to the bottom, just so they're behind the character. Okay, so if I select Finn's layers and hit U, I can bring back up all the keyframes. And I'm just going to adjust this foot so it's just sort of flush with the top of the line like this foot is. So that's his front leg, front foot. There we go. So that's our first contact pose. Now on the order, you can see the next one we want to do is basically the same pose, but on frame 24. Now I'm going to zoom into the timeline a bit because all we can see here is seconds and we need to be working with frames. So to do that, you can just go to this little mountain icon here and click and drag this slider across. And now you can see all the individual frames. So if you see this second contact pose at the end of the cycle is going to be on frame 24. So if you click here on the timeline at frame 24 and then click on front arm on the layer, click and drag and select these 4 keyframes, hit Control or Command C and then Control or Command V, it will paste those keyframes at frame 24. Now if I try highlighting these frames now and hit Control C, Control V, it's going to make a new layer here. So what you need to make sure each time you're doing this, you click on the layer you want first, then click and drag, copy, paste. Yeah? If it doesn't do that, just undo, and remember you need to click on the layer, click and drag, copy, paste. Click on the layer, click and drag, copy, paste. And then we're just going to do it finally for the back arm. So we've copied these keyframes. So we've got keyframes for the contact pose at the frame 0 and frame 24. So the next one we want to do is the opposite contact pose, which is going to come right in the middle on frame 12. So that's basically the reverse of this pose here. So this arm that is back needs to go forward, vice versa for the other arm, and the legs again. So one thing you'll notice is the head and torso are in the exact same position. So I'm going to copy the information or keyframes for the head and torso again here. So I'm going to click on the head torso layer, click and drag, copy, paste, because those stay the same for this contact pose. And then we're going to go to the front arm and we're going to rotate that forward. Okay. Now to keep things simple and to make sure that the animation doesn't start doing weird things, I'm going to hit these symbols here to lay keyframes on all of the properties. Yeah. So we want to put, each time we make an animation, we set keyframes on a layer. We want to make sure that there's keyframes on every pin and every, the rotation or position property. So next we're going to edit the other arm, put the other arm back. So I'm going to rotate it back behind him like that, and again I'm going to lay keyframes on all of the puppet pins. So you just click these buttons here and it'll set keyframes. We need to swap the legs around, so I'll have this leg come forward, edit the pins as well to straighten that out. And you can see there's not a keyframe on the hip because we're not really editing the hips, but I'm just going to set a keyframe too. It just keeps things simple. Okay, so then we want the front leg to come back. I'm going to grab the front foot. We need that back leg to be a little bit bent. And there we go, he's kind of in that contact pose. So you'll see if I click and drag this slider across now, you can see he's starting to look like a walk. He's not really moving anywhere yet. So that's our contact poses done. You'll see here I've not put keyframes on these, on the front knee and front hip, so I'm just going to put keyframes on those. It looks like I'm just going to check I've got keyframes on everything. So I have, yeah, there we go. Next, we want to go and do this passing pose. So halfway in between the two contacts, I'm going to go to frame 6. And we need to create this passing pose. Now you see here, the head is above the line. So let's start by moving the torso. So I'm going to edit the position. So if you go on position, this one is side to side. We don't want to do any of that. We want him on the spot. And then these properties here are up and down, which we do want to edit. So I'm going to move him up so that his head is kind of flush with the line and the ears poke above. Okay. Now it's the front foot nearest to the camera that's planted. So what I'm going to do, you'll notice the leg is straight there. I'm just going to go to the front foot and go to the knee and just pull that in a bit to straighten the leg. Maybe pull the foot behind too a little bit, just so the leg's a little bit straighter. And then I'm going to go to the back leg and grab the foot and just manipulate that. In fact, I might just edit the rotation a little bit. Okay, that's looking good to me. I just need to set keyframes on any of the pins that don't have them. Again, need to do that on the torso, and I think there's maybe one on the front leg that we didn't do. So, yep, the hip and rotation. The arm is looking straight there, so I want to straighten the arm out a bit. So the front arm, gonna pull the elbow there and just stretch the arm a little bit so it's a bit straighter rather than curved, and then set keyframes on all the properties. And then I'm gonna do the same for the back arm. So I'm just gonna toggle the eye icon on the head and torso so I can see what's going on a bit more. Maybe turn the leg layer off, and I want to straighten the arm layer again like I just did with the front arm. I'm going to do that to the back arm. So I'm going to go to the elbow, just pull that in a bit, stretch the arm down. Okay, and I'm just going to turn the layers back on with the eye icon so I can see everything. And now if I scrub my cursor across the timeline, you can see that's looking more like a step. Just with those two different positions, or three different positions, two contacts and the up, it's actually starting to look like a walk. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the up pose, but between the next two contact poses. Okay. So that is, where is it? Not the up pose, sorry, the passing pose. So it's on frame 18. Okay, and again, the head and torso are the exact same height. So we're going to go to the head and torso. Oh, in fact, there's one thing I've forgotten to do. We want the head and torso to come back a little bit. So how the contact is leaning forward, just for a little bit of extra appeal, I want there to be a bit of bobbing back and forth with his head as he's walking. So I'm going to go on the head pin and torso and just straighten him out a little bit on this passing pose. Okay, so now on the next pass pose on frame 18, we're going to copy the properties. Okay, so click and drag, Control C, Control V, so he's already at the height he needs to be. And then we're going to edit the limbs. So front arm, again, we need to just straighten that out a little bit. Set keyframes here. The front leg this time is the one that's bending, so I'm going to just rotate that forward a little bit. Grab the front foot. Just get that into place. And the back leg, and rotate that a little bit there. Click on the knee, straighten it out. Okay, set a keyframe on any that are blank. I'm going to turn the torso off so I can just see the back arm. And I'm going to straighten that arm out again. And turn the torso back on. Okay, so if I scrub through now, I'll just set a keyframe there. And here. So we've got keyframes on everything. You can see here I've missed 2 keyframes off here, so I'm just going to set keyframes there as well. Okay, so if I scrub through now, it's looking more like 2 steps. Okay, so then all we need to do now, we've got our contacts and our passing poses in. So now we just need to do the down and the up poses. Okay, and we can just kind of work straight ahead for those. So first we're going to do this down pose. So I'm going to go to frame 3. Now there's one thing wrong with this reference here that I've got, in that the arms are a bit closer together, and on the down pose the arms should actually swing out more than they do on the contact pose, which is kind of a little bit of overlapping action. It just adds a bit more appeal to the walk, so we'll just bear that in mind. Now the down position is quite similar to the contact pose, so what I like to do is just copy the keyframes from the contact pose and paste them on the down on frame 3, just to start off with as a starting point. So I'm going to click on front arm layer here, click and drag, copy, paste. And I'm going to do that for each of the layers. Okay, so you can see I've got him in the contact pose. So what we need to do here, you see here, first thing I notice on the down position is the head is lower than the line. So we need to go to the head and torso layer, and bring him down a little bit. Okay. Then we need to make sure always that these feet are flush with the foot line. So I'm going to go to the front foot and just bring the knee out a bit, bring that up. Okay, so it's kind of in this position, and then the back foot is kind of dragging out behind the body, so I'm going to grab the back foot and pull that up level with the line. I can see here as well, the leg is kind of breaking out of the artwork, which we don't want. So I'm going to edit the hip on the front leg. Okay, let's go up to the front leg. It might not be doing this on yours, but it is on mine, so I'm just going to fix that a little bit. Okay, that's looking better. And then we want to edit the arms. So the arms, like I said, need to swing out a little bit. Oops. So I'm going to go to the front arm. I'm going to edit the rotation very slightly, and then I'm going to grab the hand pin and just straighten it out that way, just so the arms fling out a little bit here, so you can see they pop out a little bit. Yeah. I'm going to do the same with the back arm. So rotate it slightly, grab the hand pin and just flick that up. So you can see there, oh, I was on the wrong frame there, let's undo that. So back arm, just rotate slightly, grab the hand pin, and flick that up. Okay, so you can see the arms kind of extend out a little bit further on the down pose. So that's looking nice. So, and then we want to do the up pose. So we go to frame 9, and here the up, you can see the head breaks through the line, so I'm just going to go back to the torso. In fact, I just want to check on the down position. Yeah, I've got keyframes on everything, so that's good. So let's go to the torso on frame 9 and adjust the position up. Okay. And then let's set keyframes. In fact, again, we want to just tweak the head, make him pull him back a little bit. So let's get the head pin and just pull that back slightly. Okay, and then set keyframes on the other layers, on the other properties, sorry. Front arm. Let's see what's going on here. So the front arm is, it's kind of doing what it should already, so I'm just going to set keyframes there on each of those. I'm not going to adjust the arm. The back arm, the elbow's sticking out and it needs to be a bit bent, so I'm just going to go to the back arm, click on the elbow pin here. I'm just going to pull that back a little bit so it looks like that arm's bent. And then I'm going to set keyframes on all of those. The leg needs to straighten out, it needs to be nice and stretched and extended, so let's grab the foot. Sorry, that's the back leg, let's go to the front leg. So let's drag that foot down to the line. The knee back. So that's a nice extended leg. And the knee here on the back leg needs to be a bit higher. So let's go to the back leg, grab the knee. Pull the foot back a bit. And set keyframes wherever there are any. Okay, let's have a look at that now. Scrub through. So that's looking good. One thing you'll notice as I'm scrubbing through here, you can see here the foot is breaking through the line. Now we don't want that, but we'll come back and we'll edit stuff like that later, just to refine the walk a little bit. So next we want the other down position on frame 15. So again, I'm going to do the same thing as I did last time, and copy. So we've got the contact there. I'm going to copy the frames from the contact onto here, just so it's easier to manipulate, because he's already kind of in the right position. Just needs a few tweaks. So I'm going to go onto the arm, click and drag, copy the keyframes from the contact, go to frame 15 and paste them. Front leg layer, copy, paste. Head and torso, copy, paste. Back leg, copy, paste. Back arm, copy, paste. So the next thing as well is to go to the down position, the first down position, and copy the head and torso keyframes from the first down. Let's just copy and paste those. Oh, that wasn't right. Need to click on the layer, click and drag, copy, paste, just so he's down at the right height. So next we'll edit the limbs. So let's get the legs right. So this front foot needs to come up to the line. Like that. And then the back leg. Let's have the knee coming up and the foot on the line. And again, remember that the arms need to swing out a little bit more on the down position. So let's go to the front arm, rotate it slightly, grab the hand and just flick it up. And let's go to the back arm, rotate that back slightly, go to the hand and flick that out. Okay. And then the last one to do is the final up position on frame 21. So again, I want to copy the keyframes from the first up, which is on frame 9. So I'm going to go to head and torso, copy the keyframes from frame 9, and paste them there so he's got the right height. I'm going to edit the front leg. So I'll grab the knee, bring that up a little bit. I'm just tweaking it here because you can see like the limbs do some weird stuff. So I'm just tweaking it so it doesn't look quite so rigid. Okay. And again, I've got this issue here where the line has broken. So I'm just going to move the hip slightly. There we go. So the back leg, we're just going to tweak the knee and stretch the foot down to the line. And again, this time the front arm, the elbow kind of needs to stick out a little bit, so let's go to the front arm. Pull the elbow up, maybe pull that forward. I'm going to rotate the back arm a little bit. Grab the hand pin, pull that up. Just pull that up a little bit. Okay, and now I'm going to set keyframes where there aren't any of the layers. And I think that's it. Let's have a look. So if I scrub through, it's looking like a proper walk. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is just these bits where the feet are slipping below the line. I'm just going to go onto those frames and fix those frame by frame. Okay, so let's find them. So let's scrub through. So here, we're on the front foot. Each time I'm just going to just tweak it a little bit so that the foot is above the line. That's fine, that's sorted. And then again here. So this time it's the back foot. Let's have a look. Back foot. Just tweak. Pull that up a little bit. Now here I've got the opposite problem. It's just a tiny bit above the line. Let's pull that down. Okay. So if I go here to frame 24, our final frame, and I just hit N, just drag this here. There we go. Now that's basically trimming what the computer will render. Now if I hit play, it'll just loop. And there we go. That's our walk cycle. Okay, so I'm just gonna delete those references. Just select these and hit delete, backspace. And I'm gonna extend that back to the length of the composition. Okay, I could have just zoomed out then and it would have been much quicker. Okay, so now basically we want to copy and paste these keyframes to cover the whole composition. We could use script or coding just to make them loop from the keyframes we've already got, but just for ease's sake, and since a lot of you will just be beginners and new to this, we're just going to copy and paste. So it's similar to what we did before. Click on the layer name, click and drag. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to go to frame 24, Control C, Control V, paste, and then I'm going to click and drag, go to the end frame, Control C, Control V. I'm just going to repeat that. And then one last time. And there we go, I've got the frames all the way along. As you can see, that's the arm looped, and you just want to repeat that for each of the layers. Okay, so now in theory we should have a nice 12-second walk cycle. There we go. So now we want to add our parallax background. So what we're going to do is make a new composition. So to do that, we'll go to File, New, Composition, New Composition. I'm going to call this Fin Parallax. Everything's okay here, frame rate 25, duration 12 seconds, 4K, so click OK. Okay, so when I click on the drop down, I can see all the layers here. So I'm just going to click on 0, the foreground layer, hold shift, go down to 7 and just drag these into the timeline. Now you can see here we've got, it's a nice wide background. What I need to do is just hit P for position and just drag all the layers across. So it just needs to be lined up so it's at the edge of the window here. Okay, I'm gonna drag in our fin walk cycle comp. So I'm going to put that in between layer 0 and layer 1. Now we hit play, you can see we've got our little walking animation on the spot. Okay, I'm just going to pull him down a little bit. And then next thing we want to do is basically set keyframes on the position for all of the background layers. Okay, so if I click and drag, I've got all the layers selected, and then if I hold Command or Control and click on Fin, it'll deselect him. I'm just going to hit the stopwatch on the position, and then I'm going to go to 12 second on the last frame. I'm going to zoom out a bit, click and drag. I'm going to zoom out a bit, and then I'm going to go on to layer 1, just drag that So I'm going to go to layer 1, and then I'm going to drag that all the way across. Or I can click here, hold shift, it'll keep it straight, so pretty much all the way across. Now if I hit play, you can see that'll just start moving. But we need to edit the other layers. So with parallax, basically anything that's closest to the camera will move fastest. So you can see I've got these hills here. I've also got this tree in the foreground on layer 0. So I'm going to have that start kind of a bit off camera. Go to the last frame, I'm going to drag that kind of further across. So let's just click play. So you can see that's moving faster than the hills that are behind it, which is good. It's right, it kind of gives us a sense of perspective. I want it to go just a little bit faster. So I could go here and drag the tree across even more, which would make it faster, or I can make the action happen a bit faster by moving this keyframe here. So it moves between those two positions in a shorter space of time. So let's just hit play and see how that works. Maybe somewhere in between. Okay. Right, so next I'm just going to work through the layers. So we've got the midground hills. So I'm just going to pull those across a little bit. In fact, I want the first frame of these midground hills. I'm going to drag this across because it doesn't move very much. I'm going to have the trees start over here. So I'm dragging it across, and then on my last frame, I'm going to drag that across there. So let's just see. So that's already starting to look better. So the background hills, I'm going to have a very slight bit of movement on them. The mountains, again, I want it to look a bit more dramatic, so I'm just going to go to the first frame, drag the mountain layer across there, so I've got more mountains in the background. So that's my first frame. Go to the last and just have them move slightly. Okay. And then the foreground clouds, the big clouds, let's just give them a little nudge. And then the background clouds, a smaller nudge. And there we go. So if I hit play, we've got the background parallaxing. So I'm just gonna bring in, I've got the audio here. So let's put the audio in.
Picture time, come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands. Take the dog and then the human, the book will never end, it's adventure. Picture time.
Cool. So that's it. There's walking and parallaxing. The only other thing I'm going to do is, well, I'm going to do two things. So we'll have Finn come in off camera. So to do that, I'm going to click on the Finn walk cycle layer, hit position. And I want him to basically get to the midpoint at around 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to hit position there, set a keyframe, and at frame 0, just going to drag him across here. Hit play. Now you can see that kind of looks a bit janky because he just stops all of a sudden there. It almost looks like he's walking really fast and then stops. So I'm going to select this keyframe, right click, go keyframe assistant, and put easy ease in, so it'll ease into the motion. Let's see how that looks. Still a bit fast. Okay, so I'm going to drag that to 4 seconds. Let's have a look. So that looks much better. I want the tree though to come in a bit later now. So let's have a look. Let's click on position here for the tree, I've got both keyframes selected. I'm just going to drag them across. Maybe to the 4-second mark. So now the tree is going to come in later. Let's hit play.
Come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands.
Maybe a bit earlier, let's put that to around 2 seconds. Okay.
Take your time, come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands.
That's looking good. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just add a camera. Okay, I'm just going to collapse these layers. So a lot of the time with the camera, I'll add a null object and parent the camera to the null and just control the null object, and the camera will follow that. Now, a null object it's basically just an empty layer that has properties. So I'm just going to go to Layer, New, Null Object. You can see we've got this null layer here, and then Layer, New, Camera, and I'm going to click OK. Okay, so on all these layers, I need to enable 3D layers. So if I have all the layers selected and I check this box here, that enables 3D layers. Okay. Next thing I need to do is parent the camera to the null object. And then if I click on null and hit P to bring up the position properties, if I move, you can see it moves the camera around the scene. So that's side to side, up and down, but we don't really want any of that. What we want to do is go in and out. So that's zooming in, zooming out. Okay, so I want the camera to be fully zoomed out around here, about 3.5 seconds. So I'm going to click the stopwatch to set a keyframe, and I want to be zoomed in at the start. And to the left. Okay, let's just hit play. See how that looks. I'm just going to set this to 1/3 so it renders quicker and we can preview it.
Take your time, come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands.
That's looking nice.
Take your time, come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very.
I'm just going to set this to ease in as well, so it kind of matches the walk. Ease in. And then when it says Finn the human, I want it to zoom back into him. Okay.
Come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands.
Okay, so I'm going to set a keyframe on the position there. And then let's see how many frames. I want it to be a nice little snappy zoom. So let's say 9 frames. And I'm going to have ease out on this frame and ease in on this frame. And that should be it. Let's just zoom out and give this a play.
Take your time, come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands. Take your time, come on, grab your friends.
And there we go. Okay, so let's export this. So we'll go to File, Export, Add to Media Encoder Queue. So when Media Encoder loads up, just click here, where under the column that says Output File, click here to select where you want to save it. So I'm just going to save this on the desktop. Call it Fin Parallax V1. Click Save. I'm exporting it there's a H.264, just because that's nice and quick to upload. Match source high bit rate, and I'm just going to click this play button here. And it'll probably take a minute or two, then you'll have your video. Okay, then once it's exported, I'm just going to click here, and it should take you to your file. If I double click now, hit play.
Picture time, come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands. Take the dog and then make it land, we'll never end its adventure.
And there we go. So if you want to try that again in your own time, or you want to take this a little bit further, you do have the layers for Jake. So you could try from scratch using the puppet pin tool to rig Jake up and add him into the composition. The only difference really with Jake is he's got a tail. So what you might want to do is, set your pivot point here on the tail, and then edit the rotation a bit to have his tail kind of wagging up and down as he's moving up and down. But yeah, if you have any questions, reach me on Teams or via email, which is a.l.frith1@salford.ac.uk. But yeah, I hope you found this informative. I'm sure we'll be doing more in the future, but yeah, have fun with it.